My name is Ava Lucas. I am 38 years old. I had been married to William for 13 years, and in all that time I thought we were unshakable. I believed we were the kind of couple people looked at and silently admired. The kind of marriage that inspired others to think, yes, love can last. That belief, of course, was my undoing. Before I continue my story, kindly take a moment and subscribe to this YouTube channel, thank you. Now back to my story. It started so quietly that I didn't notice at first. William began coming home later than usual, shrugging off my questions with quick excuses. "Work's demanding," he said, loosening his tie while avoiding my eyes. I wanted to believe him. God, I needed to believe him because the alternative felt too heavy to even imagine. Nights grew colder. His side of the bed felt less lived in. He stopped reaching for me in the dark. Conversations that used to flow like running water dwindled into shallow small talk. I told myself it was a phase, that marriage had seasons and we were merely in a winter that would thaw. But winter stayed. The truth, when it came, was cruel and merciless. I learned from a neighbor, of all people, who had spotted William downtown in a cafe. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat a girl with strawberry blonde hair tied in a loose braid. She laughed, tossing her head back like she hadn't learned how to conceal her joy yet. My neighbor's words pierced through me. She looked no older than 19. First, I denied it. No, not William. He wouldn't humiliate me like that. But denial is a fragile shield, and reality always cracks it wide open. Within a week, whispers reached me from more than one direction. A friend of a friend had seen them holding hands outside a movie theater. Another had seen them kissing near the park. By the time I confronted him, my heart already knew the answer. I'll never forget that night. The living room was dim except for the lamp by the couch. I asked him, voice trembling, "Who is she?" William stared at me, his jaw tense, then sighed as though confessing was some minor inconvenience. "Her name's Sophie. She's 19. I didn't plan for this to happen, Ava. But she makes me feel alive again." Those words shattered me. Alive again? As though our 13 years together were a death sentence. As though I was the one draining the color from his life. I stood frozen, numbness rushing through me like ice water in my veins. 19, I whispered. "She's a child, William. You're 41. He didn't flinch. He just looked away, his silence worse than any insult. It told me everything. He had already chosen her. The days that followed blurred into a haze of humiliation. News of William's new lover spread quickly, as though people couldn't wait to dissect my marriage like it was a scandal ripped from a cheap magazine. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. Pity in some, amusement in others. A silent judgment hanging heavy in every half-smile and whispered conversation. The grocery store, I overheard two women near the produce aisle. One muttered, "That's her, the one whose husband ran off with a teenager." The other snickered, pretending to inspect apples. My hand shook so violently that I dropped a carton of blueberries, tiny spheres scattering across the floor like evidence of my broken composure. At night, grief consumed me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage. Every birthday party we hosted. Every Christmas morning we laughed together. Every mundane Tuesday when he'd kiss me on the forehead before leaving for work. Were those moments lies? Or did he truly love me once before Sophie's youth dazzled him? Cruelest part was imagining them together. Her carefree laugh. Her unlined skin. The way she probably looked up to him like he was some seasoned hero. And William, basking in it, reveling in the illusion that he was still young, still desirable, still powerful enough to capture the adoration of a girl barely out of high school. My body felt like an enemy. In the mirror, I saw faint lines around my eyes, a softening at my waist. Normal signs of age, of motherhood, though we never had children together. But now, under the sharp contrast of Sophie's youth, my features felt like proof of inadequacy. I pinched at my stomach, lifted my face toward the bathroom light, hating every imperfection I saw. One evening, Mia Noah, my closest friend, came over with a bottle of wine. She knew me well enough not to knock gently around the subject. She sat across from me, glass in hand, and said, "Ava, you can't let him break you like this. You are not less because he's chasing a child." Her words comforted me, but they also stung. 'Cause part of me still loved William despite everything. Part of me still wanted to beg him to come home. That's the ugly truth about betrayal. Love doesn't vanish instantly. It lingers, stubborn and pathetic, even when the person you love spits on it. I tried to carry on. I went to work. I smiled at colleagues. I performed the rituals of daily life as though nothing had changed. But inside, a war raged. Grief, anger, shame, and a desperate ache for something solid again. The last time I saw William in those early days was at a small cafe. He walked in with Sophie clinging to his arm, her laughter filling the room like bells. When his eyes met mine across the space, there was no remorse, no apology. Just a flicker of awkwardness before he pulled Sophie closer, as though to shield himself from the weight of my gaze. I left before my tears could betray me in front of strangers. Sighed, the winter air sliced through me, sharp and merciless, but it couldn't numb the deeper pain inside. The betrayal had settled into my bones. And though I didn't know it then, it was only the beginning of a journey that would twist in ways none of us could have predicted. For now, I was the abandoned wife, cast aside for a girl barely old enough to drink legally. My name had become synonymous with pity and gossip. But somewhere, deep beneath the rubble of my heartbreak, a seed of defiance stirred. It would take time, but I would not let this be the end of my story. The weeks after William left me were the hardest of my life. It wasn't just the loneliness, though that was suffocating enough. It was the way the world seemed to close in on me, pressing down with whispers, half-hidden glances, and pity that felt sharper than mockery. Everywhere I went, I carried the invisible badge of the abandoned wife. At the office, colleagues spoke to me with strained politeness, their eyes betraying what their mouths didn't dare to say. During lunch breaks, I'd catch fragments of conversations when I entered the room, voices falling suddenly silent, then restarting with exaggerated cheer. I knew what they'd been discussing. My private humiliation had turned into communal gossip. Social media made it worse. William didn't hide his new life with Sophie. Their pictures were everywhere, hand in hand at concerts, grinning at rooftop bars, even silly selfies with captions like, "Age is just a number." I scrolled through them at night, each photo a dagger. He looked so carefree, as though the 13 years we shared had been nothing more than a warm-up for his new youth-fueled adventure. I tried to block them, unfollow, mute, anything to keep my heart from bleeding out. But curiosity is cruel. I always found myself peeking, even when I swore I wouldn't. The humiliation spread beyond work and friends. Church, the kindly faces of older women twisted into masks of sympathy. "Oh, Ava," one whispered after the service, placing her hand on mine as though touching tragedy itself. "You're so strong." Strong? I felt anything but strong. I felt stripped bare, as though everyone was measuring me against Sophie's 19-year-old glow and finding me lacking. The worst moment came during a dinner party I foolishly attended at the home of mutual friends. I wanted to prove to myself more than anyone that I was still capable of holding my head high. But midway through the evening, one guest, clearly tipsy, leaned too close and muttered, "Well, Ava, at least William traded up for someone with tighter skin, eh?" The laughter that followed, nervous and thin, echoed in my skull long after I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, cheeks burning, eyes wet, and wondered how much lower my dignity could sink. Through it all, Mia Noah stayed by my side. She came over often, sometimes with dinner, sometimes with nothing more than a fierce hug. One night, when I was on the verge of tears after scrolling past yet another photograph of William kissing Sophie outside a nightclub, Mia grabbed my phone, set it face down, and said, "Ava, stop feeding the wound. She wants you to see this. Don't give her the satisfaction. She's just a kid." I whispered, my voice breaking. But she's flaunting it like some kind of victory. Like taking my husband is a trophy. Mia's eyes softened, though her words carried steel. That's because she thinks it is. She thinks she's won something. But believe me, Ava, she has no idea what it takes to be a real woman, to carry a marriage, to stand through life's storms. You haven't lost anything. He's the one who's lost you. Her conviction soothed me, but only for moments. In the quiet of my home, when the world settled and the silence pressed too hard, I wrestled with the raw truth. My self-worth had become tangled in William's betrayal. I'd find myself standing in front of the mirror for long stretches, studying every flaw, tugging at my skin as though I could reverse time. I started exercising obsessively, counting calories, chasing a body that would never be 19 again. It wasn't about health, it was desperation. One evening, after a particularly brutal workout, I collapsed on the yoga mat, drenched in sweat and tears. What's the point? I whispered to no one. William wasn't coming back. And even if he did I really want him? Did I want a man who saw me as disposable, who measured love in years shaved off a birth certificate? The answer should have been easy. But betrayal confuses everything. Love doesn't die neatly, it lingers in ashes and smoke, clouding reason. The community's reaction only deepened my struggle. Some people offered comfort, but even that stung. Every sympathetic glance felt like confirmation of my failure. Others weren't so kind. An acquaintance at the gym smirked one day and said, "Well, Ava, you know what they say, men will be men." I forced a smile, but inside I screamed. Why was the burden always on the woman to endure humiliation while the man excused himself under tired cliches? Sophie didn't help matters. She paraded her new life as though daring me to react. I once ran into her at a boutique downtown. She spotted me, smirked, and deliberately laced her fingers through William's hand. Her eyes glimmered with triumph, as though I was the competition she had bested. My stomach twisted, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a scene. I walked past, though my nails dug crescent moons into my palm. That night, I broke down completely. Sitting on the kitchen floor, back pressed against the cabinets, I sobbed until my throat burned. I whispered prayers I wasn't sure anyone heard. Why me? Why this? Haven't I given enough? But grief has a strange rhythm. Through the storm of tears comes a kind of hollow calm. And in that calm, tiny sparks of defiance flicker. I started to realize that the shame pressing down on me didn't have to define me forever. The humiliation wasn't mine to carry. It belonged to William, to his choices, to Sophie's immaturity. I wasn't there yet, but the seed had been planted. And fate, with its twisted sense of irony, was preparing to water that seed in a way I never could have imagined. 'Cause soon I would meet someone who would change the direction of my story entirely. Someone who knew exactly what it felt like to be humiliated by Sophie Miller. Her father. It happened on a gray Saturday morning, the kind where the sky looked heavy with rain and the streets felt deserted. I had forced myself out of the house for a walk, partly to escape the walls that had begun to feel like a prison, partly to prove to myself that I could still face the world. My path led me to a quiet coffee shop tucked at the corner of Main Street, the kind of place I usually reserved for lazy Sundays with a book. I ordered a cappuccino and sat near the window, trying not to think about William or Sophie or the endless loop of pain that circled my mind. That's when I noticed him. A tall man, maybe mid-50s, with silver at his temples and tired eyes that seemed to carry their own weight of sorrow. He hesitated near the counter, fumbling with his wallet before settling on a black coffee. He glanced around the shop and, finding most tables taken, looked at the empty chair across from me. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I nodded, grateful for the distraction. For a few minutes we sat in silence, sipping our drinks, the soft hum of jazz filling the background. Then, almost out of nowhere, he spoke. "I know who you are." My heart skipped. I turned to him sharply, wary of the pity I'd grown so used to receiving. But his gaze wasn't pitying, it was knowing. Heavy with something deeper. You're Ava Lucas, he continued, his voice low. William's wife. Or ex-wife, I suppose. I swallowed, uncomfortable. And you are? He paused, then leaned back as though bracing himself. Richard Miller. Sophie's father. The words hung between us like thunder. My breath caught in my throat. Of all the people I could run into, fate had delivered me to him. The father of the girl who had detonated my marriage. I didn't know whether to stand up and leave or throw my coffee at him. But his expression stopped me. It wasn't smug, it wasn't proud, it was hollow. A man carrying his own kind of humiliation. I'm sorry, Richard said softly, for what my daughter has done to you. I wish I could say I raised her better, but 19-year-olds don't listen to lectures about morality. She thinks she's invincible. She thinks taking your husband is some grand adventure. Something in me cracked, but not with anger, more like recognition. I saw in him the reflection of my own humiliation. Different angles, same sting. I didn't plan for this either, I muttered, staring into my cup. One day I had a husband, and the next I was just a cautionary tale. Richard gave a bitter laugh. Try being the father whose daughter proudly flaunts herself on social media as someone's new conquest. Neighbors whisper about me, colleagues look at me like I failed in the most public way possible. Every time she posts another picture, I feel it like a slap. We fell into silence again, but this time it was less strained. Almost like we were sitting in the same boat, drifting in the same rough water. Over the next hour, words spilled more easily. I told him about the whispers in the grocery store, about the endless comparisons to Sophie's youth. He told me about the arguments at home, the slammed doors, the way Sophie dismissed his every attempt at reason with, "You don't understand, Dad. You're old." There was no judgment between us, no need for masks. Just two broken people sharing the wreckage left behind by the same storm. When we finally stood to leave, Richard surprised me. Listen, he said, pulling a card from his wallet. I don't expect anything. But if you ever need someone who understands, call me. No one else gets it like I do. I slipped the card into my purse, not sure if I'd ever use it. But as I walked home, I felt lighter. For the first time since the betrayal, I wasn't drowning alone. Someone else had been dragged under the same tide. Days later, I did call him. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet and uneventful, and I didn't want to sit in silence anymore. Richard picked up on the second ring, and his voice carried a warmth I hadn't realized I needed. We talked for an hour about everything and nothing, the absurdity of small-town gossip, the strange way grief shifts your perspective, even about coffee blends and favorite books. From then on, our conversations became a lifeline. We met for walks in the park, sharing stories about our pasts. He told me about his late wife, a gentle woman he still missed deeply. I told him about how William and I met, the early days when love felt endless. We laughed sometimes, which startled me. I hadn't thought laughter was possible anymore. One afternoon, as we sat on a park bench watching children play, Richard turned to me and said, "It's strange, isn't it? Our pain came from the same source, yet somehow it's the thing bringing us a little bit of peace now." I smiled faintly, meeting his gaze. Maybe that's the irony life enjoys playing with. The more we spoke, the more I realized I looked forward to his company. Not in a romantic way, not yet. It was simpler than that. He was someone who didn't see me as a failure or a scandal. He saw me as Ava, a woman surviving something brutal. And I saw him as Richard, a father struggling to reconcile love for his daughter with the shame of her choices. But under that growing connection lay an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. We were tied together by Sophie, whether we liked it or not. She was the girl who had blown apart my marriage and tarnished his fatherhood. And while Richard and I found comfort in each other, Sophie's shadow lingered. Till when he walked me to my car one evening and said, "You make the weight feel lighter," I felt something shift inside me. A flicker of warmth where there had only been cold. It happened so subtly that I almost didn't notice. One moment, Richard was simply a companion in my grief. a fellow traveler carrying wounds that mirrored mine. The next, there was a warmth curling inside me whenever his name appeared on my phone, a quickening in my chest when I saw him waiting for me at the cafe or the park. First, I tried to deny it. Love, or whatever this was, had burned me too badly to trust again. But healing has a way of sneaking in when you least expect it. And Richard was patient, never pushing, never demanding. He was simply there. One rainy evening, I invited him over for dinner. Felt strange at first, setting the table for two in the same dining room where William and I had once shared countless meals. I worried about appearances. What would the neighbors think if they saw Richard Miller walking into my house? But the moment he stepped inside, carrying a bouquet of lilies, my favorite, though I'd never told him, the heaviness lifted. We cooked together, laughing when he accidentally spilled sauce across the counter. Later, we sat at the table with candles flickering between us, and for the first time in months, I felt like a woman again, not just a discarded wife. After dinner, we lingered in the living room with glasses of wine. The rain tapped gently against the windows, and the air was thick with unspoken words. I leaned back into the couch, studying him. His eyes, lined with years, carried a steadiness that soothed me. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Ava, I didn't expect to find this. Not now. Not like this. But being with you, it feels like a piece of my life fits back together." My throat tightened. I wanted to answer, but emotions tangled in my chest. I settled for honesty. "I'm terrified, Richard. Loving someone again, it feels like walking barefoot across glass. But you've been my calm when everything else has been chaos." He reached over then, his hand warm as it closed gently over mine. That simple touch was enough. It wasn't a grand declaration or some fiery kiss. It was quiet, grounding, a promise spoken in silence. From then on, our friendship began to shift. Walks turned into dinners, dinners turned into long nights talking on the phone until sleep claimed us. I found myself smiling more often, sometimes catching my reflection and hardly recognizing the woman who had once cried herself to sleep. One afternoon, Mia stopped by unannounced. She noticed the lilies on my kitchen counter, still fresh from Richard's last visit. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a knowing grin. "Ava Lucas," she teased, crossing her arms. "There's a glow about you these days. Don't tell me it's just yoga and green tea." I laughed, rolling my eyes, but my blush betrayed me. "It's complicated." Mia leaned closer. "Complicated, sure. But you're happy. I can see it. Don't apologize for that." Her words freed something in me. For so long I'd felt guilty, guilty for hurting, guilty for healing, guilty for even thinking about moving on. But happiness doesn't always wait for permission. Sometimes it just arrives, unexpected and undeniable. Richard, too, carried his own hesitations. One evening, as we walked along the river, he admitted, "I worry what Sophie will think. She already resents me for questioning her choices. If she knew about us," he trailed off, the unspoken words heavy in the air. I squeezed his hand. "She doesn't get to dictate our lives, Richard. She made her choice when she pursued William. We're allowed to have ours." The way he looked at me then, like I wasn't a broken woman but someone worth choosing, stirred something deep inside. Our connection blossomed slowly, tenderly. It wasn't the feverish rush of youth. It was steady, intentional, like the careful layering of bricks to rebuild a house. We learned each other's rhythms, celebrated small victories, like the first time I laughed without bitterness, or the first time he admitted he could sleep through the night without waking in shame. Still, the irony was never far from my mind. The girl who had torn my marriage apart was the very reason I had met Richard. Life, in its strange way, had woven our grief into the beginnings of something new. One night, as Richard kissed me softly by my doorstep, I pulled back just enough to whisper, "Do you ever think about how twisted this is? Your daughter, my ex-husband, and us." He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "All the time. But I also think about how rare it is to find someone who truly understands you. And I'm not willing to let that go. Neither was I. By then, the whispers in town had already begun. People noticed us together, and though I braced for gossip, I found I no longer cared. Their opinions didn't carry the same weight. Because when I stood beside Richard, I didn't feel like the woman who had been left behind. I felt chosen, seen, loved. It wasn't just about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said the thought never crossed my mind. It was about finding life again after devastation. About realizing that love can grow in the most unlikely soil. As I lay in bed one night, phone pressed to my ear as Richard's voice lulled me towards sleep, I thought back to the broken woman crying on her kitchen floor weeks earlier. She seemed like a stranger now. 'Cause against all odds, I had found something worth holding on to. And though I didn't know it yet, the choices we were about to make would shake everything once more. William, Sophie, and everyone who thought they understood my story. When Richard proposed, it wasn't with grand gestures or fireworks. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where the air felt crisp and the world seemed unhurried. We were sitting on his porch, sipping coffee, watching golden leaves scatter across the yard. He set his mug down, turned to me, and said almost shyly, "Ava, I don't want to just be the man who helps you through the wreckage. I want to be the man who builds the rest of your life with you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, I could only stare at him. Marriage? The word carried so much weight. I thought of my years with William, of the betrayal, of the nights I spent convincing myself I was unlovable. And yet, here was Richard, offering me not pity but partnership, not drama but stability. My heart raced, and the answer spilled from me before doubt could stop it. Yes. Yes, I will. The simplicity of it made it perfect. No elaborate setting, no witnesses, just two people who had been broken and were choosing bravely to start again. When news of our engagement spread, the town erupted in shock. Whispers turned into open gasps. Some people called it scandalous. Others labeled it poetic justice. "Did you hear?" voices hissed in grocery store aisles and church pews. "Ava is marrying Sophie's father." The story spread faster than wildfire, and suddenly I was no longer just the abandoned wife. I was the woman who had turned humiliation into one of the most dramatic reversals people could remember. The wedding itself was intimate. We chose a small chapel just outside town, filled only with close friends. Mia stood beside me as I walked down the aisle, her eyes glistening with pride. Richard waited at the altar, his face steady, calm, as though this moment was the fulfillment of something long written for us. When we exchanged vows, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a quiet determination to cherish the life ahead. Till there was one glaring absence. Sophie. We hadn't expected her to come, of course. She hadn't spoken to Richard in weeks, not since she learned of our relationship. The argument between them had been ugly. She'd screamed at him, called him a traitor, accused him of stealing me just to punish her. "You can't be serious about her," she had spat, eyes blazing. "She's my boyfriend's ex-wife." Richard, calm but firm, had replied, "Sophie, William was her husband. And you knew that when you pursued him. Don't talk to me about betrayal, you were the one who set this chain in motion." Sophie had stormed out that day, and though part of me ached at the fracture between them, I also knew Richard couldn't let his daughter dictate his life forever. William, of course, didn't take the news well either. I learned from mutual acquaintances that he was livid, storming into bars, ranting about how I was humiliating him. "She's just doing it to get back at me," he sneered to anyone who would listen. Perhaps a part of me was fueled by revenge, but as I stood beside Richard, I realized my decision was about so much more. It was about reclaiming myself. The aftermath was surreal. Overnight, Sophie, the girl who had once strutted through town flaunting her victory, was forced to introduce me as her stepmother. The irony was rich, almost too delicious to believe. At social gatherings, the awkwardness was palpable. People didn't know whether to laugh or gasp. Sophie avoided me, her eyes darting like daggers whenever our paths crossed, while William simmered in humiliation, forced to watch as the woman he had discarded built a life not only happier but directly intertwined with his own scandal. Mia loved to tease me about it. Over brunch one weekend, she leaned across the table with a mischievous grin. "Ava, you didn't just rise from the ashes. You lit a bonfire and invited the whole town to watch. I hope you know half of them envy your courage." I chuckled, though inside I still wrestled with the strangeness of it all. It wasn't about spectacle or proving a point, it was about survival. About choosing not to wither under shame but to find something worth living for. Living with Richard was different from living with William. Our home was filled with gentleness rather than tension. He respected the small routines I'd built, my morning tea, my evening walks, and in turn I cherished his steadiness, the way he brought peace into every corner of the house. We weren't trying to prove anything. We were simply learning how to exist together, to weave our broken histories into a tapestry of something new. Till there were moments of tension. Sophie refused to visit. When Richard reached out, she responded with bitterness. "I can't believe you married her, Dad. How could you? Do you know how this makes me look?" Richard's answer was firm but loving. "This isn't about appearances, Sophie. It's about building a life that's honest." For me, her absence was both a relief and a sting. I didn't want to be her enemy forever, but I also couldn't undo what she had done. Perhaps in time wounds would heal. But for now, the distance was necessary. As for William, his silence was louder than words. He avoided me in public, but I could feel his regret in the way he carried himself, shoulders heavy, laughter forced. Once our paths crossed at a bookstore. He looked at me, at the wedding band on my finger, and his face darkened with something I couldn't quite name. Anger, yes, but also loss. I walked past him without a word, my head high. For the first time, I felt no need to explain myself, no need to shrink. I wasn't the broken woman anymore. I was Ava Lucas Miller now, wife to a man who had chosen me not in spite of my scars but because of them. The whispers in town eventually quieted. Candles burn hot, but they don't burn forever. And once the flames died down, what remained was something steady, something true. Richard and I had built a life together, one that no amount of gossip could diminish. Till I knew the story wasn't over. William's regret lingered, Sophie's resentment festered, and the strange tangle of our lives meant there would always be new storms ahead. But I also knew this, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I had already survived the worst betrayal, and found love on the other side. If you had told me 2 years ago that I would end up married to Richard Miller, the father of the young woman who wrecked my marriage, I would have laughed in disbelief. Yet there I was, waking each morning beside him, my life steadier than I had ever imagined. And while I had never plotted revenge, I couldn't ignore the strange, poetic justice of it all. William's regret came in waves, visible even from a distance. He was once a man who thrived on confidence, but now he looked older, wearier, as though his choices had stripped away something essential. He had traded decades of history with me for the fleeting thrill of a 19-year-old's attention. And yet, even that victory wasn't as sweet as he had imagined. Cracks between him and Sophie became public quickly. She was young, impulsive, and still navigating the immaturity of her age. He wanted stability and respect. Their arguments spilled into restaurants, parking lots, anywhere people could witness the awkward unraveling. A friend later told me she'd seen them fighting outside a cafe, Sophie in tears, William's face red with frustration. "You don't understand me," she had screamed before storming off, leaving him standing alone. I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a touch of satisfaction hearing those stories. But mostly I felt detached. Their chaos no longer controlled me. The sweetest revenge wasn't watching William stumble or seeing Sophie's confusion. It was simply living well. It was sitting at a dinner table with Richard, sharing stories and laughter. It was walking into town with my head high, no longer flinching at whispers. It was hearing Mia say over and over, "Ava, you look happier than I've ever seen you." Of course, Sophie didn't make things easy. The few times we crossed paths were icy. Once at the grocery store, she stared me down, her voice dripping with disdain. "Enjoy playing house, Ava. You'll never be my stepmother in my eyes." I held her gaze, calm, steady. "You don't have to see me as anything, Sophie. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm here." She stormed off, and I felt a mix of pity and exasperation. She was 19, angry, embarrassed, caught in a storm of her own making. One day, maybe, she would look back and realize that what felt like triumph had been nothing but a hollow conquest. Richard tried to bridge the gap with her, but she resisted. "Dad, you married her just to spite me," she accused during one tense phone call. Richard's voice was patient but unyielding. "I married her because I love her, Sophie. That's something you may not understand yet, but one day you will." His words softened something inside me. Love. That was the core of it. Not revenge, not spectacle, not scandal. Love. It had found me when I thought I had been cast aside forever. As months passed, William's humiliation grew. I think what stung him most wasn't that I remarried, it was who I remarried. To him, it was the ultimate insult, the one humiliation he could never spin away. People he once bragged to now avoided his gaze, unsure whether to pity or laugh at him. At gatherings, his silence was heavy, his bitterness palpable. One evening, as Richard and I attended a charity gala, William was there too. Our eyes met across the room. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see it, the ache of regret, the realization of what he had thrown away. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I simply turned back to Richard, who slipped his hand into mine, grounding me. That small gesture was all the victory I needed. Community eventually adjusted. The whispers faded into acceptance and then into indifference. Life went on, and our marriage became less of a scandal and more of a quiet truth. Richard and I built routines, traditions, Sunday dinners, long walks, nights spent talking by the fire. For the first time in years, I felt secure. Not because life was perfect, but because I had learned to choose peace over chaos. Mia often reminded me how far I had come. "Ava," she said one afternoon as we sat on her back porch, "you didn't just survive betrayal. You turned it into a doorway to something better. That's not luck, that's strength." Her words lingered with me. I realized my story wasn't about revenge or even about William and Sophie. It was about reclaiming myself after being stripped bare. It was about proving to myself most of all that brokenness could still bloom into beauty. And so, when I looked in the mirror these days, I no longer saw the abandoned woman defined by her husband's choices. I saw a woman who had stood in the ashes, wiped away the tears, and dared to rebuild. William may regret, Sophie may resent, but neither of them controlled my ending. My ending was mine to write. And I chose love. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel, like and share this video.